Here's something that almost nobody talks about, honestly. There are men out there, not the most attractive men, not the richest, not the ones who send the most texts or say the most clever things, who consistently create deep, almost magnetic attraction in women who initially had zero interest in them. And there are men who do everything right on paper. They're kind, they show up, they're thoughtful, they check every box the internet tells them to check. And somehow she still doesn't feel it. The difference between these two types of men is not what you think it is. It's not confidence, not in the way most people define it. It's not looks. It's not money. It's not some rehearsed line or a carefully crafted text message. It's something deeper, something that happens underneath the surface of a conversation, underneath the words, underneath the gestures. And if you stay with me through this video, I'm going to show you exactly what that is. Using psychology, not pickup tactics. Using emotional understanding, not manipulation. Most men are playing a game they don't understand. And because they don't understand it, they keep losing in ways they can't explain. But here's the thing. Once you see what's actually happening, you cannot unsee it. And that changes everything. Let me be clear about what this video is and what it isn't. This is not a tutorial on manipulation. This is not about tricking a woman into feeling something she doesn't want to feel. If that's what you're looking for, you're in the wrong place. And honestly, that approach doesn't even work. Not sustainably, not in any real way. What this is an honest, psychologically grounded exploration of how attraction and desire actually form in the female mind. Based on attachment theory, emotional psychology, behavioral science, and years of understanding how human beings connect on a level that goes far beneath logic. Because here's what I know after studying this deeply: attraction, real attraction, the kind that makes a woman think about you when you're not in the room. That kind of attraction is almost never created by what you say. It's created by how you make a woman feel about herself when she's around you. Read that again because that sentence is carrying more weight than it might seem right now. I'll come back to it. In this video, you're going to understand three specific psychological triggers, three mechanisms that operate in the emotional brain that shift a woman from neutral or disinterested to genuinely curious, drawn in, and desiring more of your presence. Not because you performed something, not because you said the right magic words, but because you understood something. Most men never bother to understand. Let's get into it. Here's where most men go wrong, and I want you to really sit with this because it might sting a little. Not because I'm trying to be harsh, but because nobody's been honest with you about this. When a man is attracted to a woman and he senses she's not interested, his first instinct is to do more. More texting, more complimenting, more showing up, more effort, more availability. He thinks if I just demonstrate enough value, if I'm kind enough, consistent enough, patient enough, she'll eventually see who I really am. And this feels logical. It feels even noble. In movies, this is the story that works. The persistent guy who never gives up eventually wins the girl's heart. But here's the problem. Emotion doesn't respond to logic. Attraction doesn't respond to effort the same way a job application does. You cannot convince someone to feel something by providing enough evidence. In fact, and this is the part that breaks most men's minds the first time they hear it, excessive pursuit almost always accelerates disinterest. Here's why. When you constantly make yourself available, when you over-communicate your interest before any real connection has formed, you are, without realizing it, removing something that is absolutely essential to the formation of desire. You are removing uncertainty and desire. Real desire requires a degree of uncertainty to survive. Think about something you wanted that you already had completely secured. Think about how much passion you felt for it. Once it was guaranteed, compare that to something just slightly out of reach, something you had to think about, something that made you wonder. The wondering is part of the wanting. Now, I'm not telling you to play games. I'm not telling you to be cold or distant or emotionally unavailable in some performative way. That's a surface level misunderstanding of this principle that a lot of men fall into, and it creates its own set of problems. What I am saying is this. Most men, in their sincere attempt to show a woman they're worthy of her attention, accidentally erase the very elements that would have created genuine attraction. They fill every silence. They answer every message within 30 seconds. They offer certainty and security before any emotional bond has been built to carry it. And the woman, without even consciously knowing why, feels something deflate. Not because he's a bad person, not because she's cruel or shallow, but because the emotional conditions for desire simply haven't been created. Here's the other major mistake. Most men focus entirely on what they're doing, the behaviors, the words, the actions, rather than what's happening emotionally in the woman they're interacting with. They're so focused on performing that they forget to actually connect. And connection, real emotional connection, is where desire actually begins. Now, let me show you what creates it. Trigger one, the mirror principle. Make her feel more like herself around you. There's a question most men never ask when they're trying to attract a woman. Not how do I seem more attractive to her, not what do I say to impress her. The question is, how does she feel about herself when she's around me? This is the mirror principle, and it's rooted in something very real in social psychology. Human beings and women in particular, because of how emotional attunement tends to develop, are deeply wired to form attachment to experiences and people that make them feel good about who they are, not about who you are, about who they are. When a woman leaves a conversation with you feeling sharper, more interesting, more seen, she associates that feeling with you. She carries it with her. She finds herself wanting to recreate it. This is not manipulation. This is basic attachment psychology. Now, here's the common misunderstanding. Most men think making a woman feel good means complimenting her, telling her she's beautiful, that she's smart, that she's impressive, and compliments aren't bad. But there's surface level in isolation. A compliment without presence behind it is just noise. It's something she's heard 100 times from men who wanted something from her. Snorts. The mirror principle is different. It's about the quality of your attention. It's about the depth of your curiosity. When you ask a woman a question and you actually wait for the answer, not to think of your next thing to say, but because you are genuinely interested in what she thinks, something shifts. When you remember a small detail she mentioned offhand 3 conversations ago, and you bring it up naturally, not as a tactic, but because you actually listened, something shifts. When you challenge one of her ideas thoughtfully, not to put her down, but because you find her interesting enough to take seriously, something shifts. She starts to feel around you like her words have weight, like she is worth paying attention to, like she is actually interesting. Not just pretty, not just convenient, but genuinely interesting. That is a rare feeling, and rare feelings create desire. So here's what this looks like practically. Slow down. Most men talk too much when they're nervous or trying to impress. Slow your speaking down. Create space in conversation. Let silence exist without rushing to fill it. Silence is not failure. Silence is where emotional depth lives. Be selectively curious. Don't interrogate. Don't fire questions one after another. Instead, pick one thread and go deeper. If she mentions something she's passionate about, don't gloss over it. Ask what got you into that, and then genuinely listen and then go one level deeper. This kind of attention is so rare that for many women it feels more intimate than physical touch. And here's the thing about the mirror principle. It also reveals your own character without you having to describe it. You don't have to tell her you're mature, emotionally intelligent, and genuinely interested in people. Your quality of attention demonstrates all of that automatically. She walks away thinking about the conversation, and because you were the centerpiece of it, she's thinking about you, triggered to emotional safety without predictability. Now, here's where it gets interesting, and I want you to pay close attention because this is where most of the confusion around attraction actually lives. There are 2 things that women want in someone they're drawn to that seem on the surface like they contradict each other. They want emotional safety and they want emotional excitement. Most men pick one and abandon the other. The nice guy creates safety, but no excitement. He's predictable, he's consistent, he's always available, and she feels comfortable around him, but not excited, not pulled, not curious. The bad boy, or what people casually call that, creates excitement, but no safety. He's unpredictable, he's unreliable, and she feels a kind of anxious pull toward him. But it's not desire born from genuine connection. It's anxiety masquerading as attraction, and it's toxic for everyone involved. The man who understands female psychology, who actually understands what's happening emotionally, creates both. And the way you create both is through what I call emotional safety without predictability. Let me explain what that means in practical terms. Emotional safety is not about being boring. It's not about being endlessly available or agreeable. Emotional safety is about being consistent in your character. It means she knows who you are. She knows your values. She knows that when you say something, you mean it. She knows that you're not going to shift into a completely different person depending on the situation or based on whether she's giving you attention. That consistency, that groundedness in who you are, creates an environment where she can actually relax around you. And relaxation is the doorway to genuine emotional openness. You cannot desire someone you don't feel safe opening up to. But emotional safety alone creates comfort. And comfort without tension doesn't create desire. It creates friendship, which is wonderful. But it's not what we're talking about here. So, where does the unpredictability come in? Not from being inconsistent in character, not from being hot and cold emotionally, not from manufactured mystery. It comes from having a rich, full inner life that she doesn't have complete access to. It comes from having your own opinions that don't bend to her approval. It comes from the fact that you don't need the interaction to go a certain way. You're genuinely okay if it doesn't. Here's how this feels from her side. When a man is clearly invested in whether she likes him, when his mood visibly shifts based on her level of warmth toward him, she feels the pressure of that. She becomes cautious. She starts managing him rather than connecting with him. But when a man is grounded, when he's warm and present and genuinely interested, but also clearly someone who has a full life that doesn't depend on her validation, something interesting happens. She starts to lean in because here's a fundamental truth about human desire. We are most drawn to what we haven't fully figured out yet. A man who reveals everything immediately, who communicates his interest so completely and consistently that there's nothing left to discover. He removes the experience of discovery. And discovery is one of the most pleasurable emotional experiences a person can have. A man with debt, with opinions, with quiet passions, with a sense of humor that occasionally surprises her with a perspective she didn't predict. He gives her something to return to, something to explore. Think of it this way. Imagine two rooms. One room you've been in 100 times. You know exactly where everything is. There's nothing new to find. The other room you've only visited a few times. You know the general layout, but there are doors you haven't opened yet, shelves you haven't fully looked at. Which room calls you back? Be the second room, not by being deceptive, not by hiding who you are, but by being a man who is genuinely interesting, who has a life, has views, has depth, and who doesn't pour all of that out in the first three conversations because he's trying to prove his worth. Emotional safety comes from your consistency and groundedness. The unpredictability comes from your depth and your self-contained wholeness. Put them together, and you have something genuinely rare. Trigger 3, the scarcity of your approval. The most overlooked driver of desire. This is the one. This is the principle that when I first really understood it, not just intellectually, but emotionally, it changed the way I understood every relationship dynamic I'd ever witnessed. And it's the one that most men get completely backwards. Here it is. Women are most drawn to men whose approval feels earned, not given. Let me say that a different way. When a man's approval, his attention, his admiration, his interest is freely available to anyone who asks for it or who simply shows up, it has very little value in the emotional economy of attraction. But when a man's attention is clearly selective, when you sense that he sees a lot of people but is genuinely moved by very few, receiving his focused attention feels like something. It feels like recognition, like being chosen, and not because he's withholding, not because he's playing a game, but because he actually has standards. He actually notices things. He actually responds to quality. And that being truly seen and selected by someone with a high internal standard is one of the most compelling emotional experiences a person can have. Here's the mistake most men make. They extend equal warmth, equal attention, equal interest to almost everyone, especially to the woman they're attracted to. They compliment freely. They agree readily. They laugh at everything. They make themselves endlessly, generously available. And the intention behind this is usually pure. They want her to feel valued. They want to show her they're interested. They want to be kind. But what she receives is not "I'm special to him." What she receives is, he's like this with everyone. And that distinction matters more than almost anything else in the early formation of desire. Now, again, I am not telling you to be withholding. I'm not telling you to suppress genuine warmth or to manufacture coldness. That's a shallow misreading of this principle. What I'm saying is, your approval should reflect something real inside you. You should actually have preferences. You should actually have things you find genuinely impressive versus things you find ordinary. You should be someone who does not laugh at everything, but when you do laugh, really laugh, it means something. You should be someone who does not give compliments constantly, but when you do give one, she feels it land differently than any compliment she's received before. This requires you to actually cultivate an inner life, to actually know what you value, what moves you, what you find beautiful or impressive or compelling in a person. It requires you to be a man who has genuinely thought about what kind of person is worth your full attention and who acts accordingly. A man like that doesn't have to chase because his selective attention has weight. And here's the deeply counterintuitive part. This is the trigger that most powerfully affects a woman who initially isn't interested. Because if you've been showing up with energy that says, I need you to like me, your presence carries that weight. She feels it. And it creates a particular dynamic where she is the holder of value and you are the one in pursuit of it. Shift that dynamic not by becoming cold or arrogant, but by becoming genuinely self contained, genuinely selective, genuinely invested in your own standards and experience. And the entire emotional landscape of the interaction changes. Suddenly, she's the one wondering what you think. She's the one who wants to say something that actually lands with you. She's the one who becomes curious about what earns your genuine attention. She starts to lean towards you, not because you played the trick, but because you've become someone worth leaning toward. So let's bring this out of the abstract and into the actual texture of real life. Because principles without application are just interesting ideas. Here's what this looks like when you actually live it. You're talking to a woman you're drawn to. Maybe you've spoken a few times. Maybe she's been a little warm, a little distant. You can't quite read it. Most men in this moment are internally asking, does she like me? What do I do to make her like me? The man who understands these three principles is internally asking something different. He's asking, am I actually enjoying this conversation? What's genuinely interesting about her? What do I actually think about what she just said? That internal shift from performing to actually experiencing changes everything about how you show up. Your attention becomes real instead of strategic. Your responses become honest instead of calibrated. And women who are extraordinarily perceptive to authenticity feel the difference immediately, even if they can't name it. In practice, this means you sometimes disagree. Not to be difficult, but because you actually have a perspective. You say, I actually see that differently, with calm confidence, and then you explain how you see it. No apology, no hedging, just your honest view offered with respect. This is so rare in men who are trying to attract a woman that it almost always creates a small electric moment. She wasn't expecting it. She has to recalibrate slightly. She becomes more alert, more present. In practice, this also means you sometimes end the conversation first. Not dramatically, not as a tactic, but because you have somewhere to be, or because you feel the conversation has reached a natural high point and you're confident enough to leave it there rather than stretching it out until the energy deflates. This has been a good conversation. I'll let you get back to it. And you mean it, and you leave. She'll think about that more than she'd think about another hour of pleasant but forgettable small talk. In practice, this means you notice small specific things about her. Not to flatter, but because you're actually paying attention. Not you're so beautiful, but that story you told last time about your grandmother. I thought about it the next day. There was something about the way you described her. That specificity is the footprint of genuine attention. And it lands in a completely different place emotionally than a general compliment. And here's perhaps the most practical thing of all. Become genuinely interested in your own life. The most attractive version of you is not the version performing attractiveness for someone else. It's the version that is actually building something, learning something, experiencing something, and who genuinely doesn't need her validation to feel whole. Not because you're closed off, but because you're full. A man who is full emotionally, intellectually, experientially creates a very different gravitational pull than a man who is empty and looking for a woman to complete him. Desire follows aliveness. Be alive in your own experience. Let her witness that. Snorts, if any part of what I've shared here resonated with you, I want to offer something. Not a course, not a program with 27 steps, just a suggestion. Take the next week and practice one thing before every significant interaction, not just with women, but with anyone whose presence matters to you. Ask yourself one question. How does this person feel about themselves when they're around me? That single question held consistently will begin to change how you show up in a way that no tactical advice ever could, because it orients you toward the other person's inner experience rather than your own performance. And that orientation is the beginning of real connection. Real connection is the beginning of genuine desire. Of genuine desire is the beginning of something that can actually last. If you want to continue going deeper into the psychology of attraction, connection, and becoming the kind of man who creates meaningful relationships rather than chasing them, this channel is the right place. Everything here is grounded in emotional intelligence and human psychology. Not shortcuts, not tricks, understanding. Because understanding is the only thing that actually changes behavior from the inside out. Let me leave you with the thread that ties everything together. Desire is not something you create in another person by doing things to them. Desire is something that emerges naturally when two conditions are met. One, the person feels genuinely safe with you, safe to be themselves, safe to show up without performing, safe to open. Two, the person feels genuinely curious about you, curious about what you think, how you see the world, what it would be like to know you more fully. Everything I've shared today, the mirror principle, emotional safety without predictability, the scarcity of approval, is really just three different expressions of the same deeper truth. Be a man who is real. Be a man who is full. Be a man who has cultivated enough of his own inner world that his attention, when it lands on someone, feels like something worth receiving. You don't manufacture that. You build it slowly through the choices you make about how you spend your time, what you choose to understand, how seriously you take your own emotional development. The men who genuinely understand women, who form the kind of connection that creates real desire, they're not doing something mysterious. They're not running a strategy. They're simply more present, more grounded, and more genuinely interested in the inner world of another person than most men ever allow themselves to be. And that present, quiet, real, undemanding is more compelling than anything else you could say or do. The woman who wasn't interested becomes curious. The woman who was curious becomes drawn in. The woman who was drawn in starts to feel something she wasn't expecting, and she starts to wonder why. The answer is always the same. It's because you made her feel something true. That's the whole game. And it's not a game at all. If this hit something in you, drop a comment below. Tell me which of the three principles landed most strongly. I read them. I think about what you share. And if you know someone who's stuck in patterns that aren't working for him, share this with him. Not as advice, just as something worth watching.